Hi, I'm Mike Reagan. Thank you for joining us for this Newsmax 2012 election special. Soon Iowa will make a critical vote, a decision you might say, for the future of our country and in a very real way for the world. You know, it wasn't too many years ago, in fact in 1976, my father stepped before a microphone in a convention hall in Kansas City. And he talked about his vision for America. But he also talked about being asked to write a letter to be put into a time capsule that would be opened on the 300th anniversary of the United States of America. And he said, what a daunting task, to write a letter to be put into a time capsule to be opened by those people on the 300th anniversary of this nation who would know everything about us, but we would know nothing of them. And he thought, what do I write about? He said, do I write about the freedoms we enjoy today, knowing that if we don't make the right decision today, they may very well not enjoy the freedoms to open up that time capsule to read the letter I have put into it. That's how important this next election is. It is about our freedoms. It is about voting to make sure those people can open up that time capsule to see what my father put into it. In this Newsmax special, I hope we can capture again that boldness and vision and yes, greatness. Today, Newsmax, one of the country's most influential news media outlets, one I write for, is offering this election special. In a minute, we are featuring a person that we believe will help continue my father's vision, a man who fought in Congress for my father's programs, a man who believes that President Obama's vision for America is a dangerous one and must be stopped and reversed. That person is Newt Gingrich. In a minute, Newsmax will sit down with Newt to hear his take on continuing the Reagan legacy of smaller government and turning back President Obama's radical policies like Obamacare and bringing back our economic and moral greatness. Recently, you've been hearing a lot about Speaker Gingrich. Millions of dollars have been spent in negative ads against him. But let's discuss the real Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich has led an American life. Newt was raised by his mother, Kathleen, and his adoptive father, Robert Gingrich, a career soldier and Army officer. An extremely bright child, Newt did well in his studies and found his first calling to become a teacher. He did just that. He earned a PhD and went on to teach history at West Georgia College. In the 1970s, he became dismayed by the liberal politics dominating Washington, the malaise those policies were causing, and the harm it was doing to our economy. He decided to do something about it. And in 1978, Gingrich won his first election to Congress representing part of the Atlanta suburbs. Once in Washington, Congressman Gingrich began to confront the usual politics and became a leading ally of my father, Ronald Reagan. He helped Congress push through massive tax cuts. He worked to secure a military buildup that helped defeat the Soviet Union. Under his leadership, Congress also limited the welfare state. As a leader in the Reagan Revolution, Gingrich began to confront both Republicans and Democrats in Congress for their cozy insider deals. By the early 1990s, he and a group of young conservatives made an audacious move to gain control of Congress. Gingrich wrote The Contract with America, a blueprint of what Republicans would do if they won Congress. In 1994, the American people agreed with that contract, and Newt Gingrich and his fellow conservatives were swept to power in an amazing political upheaval. This sweep ended almost 5 decades of Democratic rule in Congress. Gingrich was elected as the 58th Speaker of the House, the third highest elected official in the land. Gingrich then led the most reform-minded Congress in history. And his team pushed and got big tax cuts, limits in federal spending, and during his speakership, the country witnessed an unparalleled economic recovery, giving the country our first balanced budget in decades. After leaving Congress, Newt Gingrich has remained at the forefront of an American political scene. In speeches, books, and heading organizations advocating for conservative ideas, he has helped keep my father's legacy alive. Ladies and gentlemen, Newt Gingrich joins us now for this Newsmax Campaign Special 2012. And at the end of this program, I will offer a special message on the role you can play in helping to turn back the Obama agenda and make America great again. So now, let's send it to the studio for Newsmax's exclusive conversation with Newt Gingrich.
Well, thank you, Michael, for that introduction, and welcome, Newt Gingrich. And we just heard from Michael Reagan, the oldest son of President Ronald Reagan and one of the staunchest defenders of his legacy. Tell us, how would Ronald Reagan deal with his current economic crisis?
Well, we know, because he dealt with a similar crisis. We know that he would cut taxes, that he would cut regulations, that he would focus on American energy, and that he would reward and encourage the people who create jobs. In a sense, he's the opposite of Obama. Obama's kind of the anti-Reagan, in that Reagan would cut taxes, Obama would raise them. Reagan would cut bureaucracy, Obama increases it. Reagan would work on American energy, Obama's anti-American energy. Reagan liked people who created jobs, Obama believes in class warfare.
How is the next president possibly going to deal with this staggering debt that continues to mount and faces our country right now?
Well, there are two components. One is you control government spending through a variety of steps, and the other is you accelerate economic growth. If we were back at 4% unemployment, the sheer speed of economic growth, the amount of new money as people found jobs and as investments got better, would help you with it. And then if you controlled spending, reformed the government, applied the 10th Amendment to move some things back to the states, and fundamentally modernized the government to save at least $500 billion a year just in modernizing it, you could get to a balanced budget, I think, in 5 to 7 years.
Are you happy with the role that the Federal Reserve has played during this economic crisis?
No, I think it's a disaster, and I think it's a real affront to democracy. Chairman Ben Bernanke has had far too much power. He has spent trillions of dollars with no supervision, no check, no responsibility. I want us to audit the Fed. I want us to propose that every decision document since 2008 be released so people can see who got money, who didn't, when was the decision made, why was it made. I would ask Chairman Bernanke to resign, and if he refused, I would ask the Congress to pass a law to end his term early and have an interim chairman. I think he's a very bad chairman, and I think economically he's a very dangerous chairman.
Of course, you've been in Iowa quite a bit. What would President Gingrich do to restore the economic strength of that state?
Well, Iowa has an amazing amount of small manufacturing, which is why our tax program of zero capital gains, 100% expensing to write off all new investments in 1 year for equipment, the 12.5% corporate tax rate, which is the Irish rate, which would make us more competitive, and abolishing the death tax permanently. All of those fit with Iowa. But the other thing that fits there is a proposal I have at newt.org to replace the Environmental Protection Agency with a brand new Environmental Solutions Agency. I think it's very important to understand that the Environmental Protection Agency is a real job killer. Everywhere I go, people talk about the burden it's putting on city and county government. People talk about the burden it puts on businesses. The Environmental Protection Agency is an agency of elitist, radical bureaucrats run amok who are trying to impose their ideology on the country without any regard to economic cost.
Well, President Obama has made it clear that he wants to tax the rich. When you were Speaker of the House, you actually passed laws that lowered taxes across the board. What's your new tax plan?
Our tax policy is, first of all, zero capital gains, which will bring hundreds of billions of dollars of new money into the United States to be invested in factories and in new businesses. Second, 12.5% corporate tax rate, which is the Irish level, which will bring $700 billion or more of profits that are currently overseas back home. It will also enable American companies to compete on a fair playing field. Today, we have the second highest corporate tax rate in the world, and it is slowing our companies down. Third, we have 100% expensing, as I mentioned earlier, which means that any new equipment you buy, you write off in 1 year. And the goal is to have the American worker the most modern, the most productive in the world, which is what you have to be to sustain a high value-added economy. And then finally, we abolish the death tax permanently so that families can focus on being productive, on creating jobs, not trying to work with their accountant and their lawyer to figure out how to get around the tax code. We also have for individuals a 15% alternative flat tax. So you can either keep the current code, with all of its complexity, or you can put in a single page and pay 15%. It's a system of dual choice that Hong Kong has worked very, very well for the last generation or so. And people get to choose which one's better for them.
Well, let's talk about illegal immigration and illegal immigrants. Americans in the heartland are very angry. Practically anybody can just walk across the U.S.-Mexico border. And over 10 million illegals are competing for Americans with jobs or for jobs. What's the Gingrich plan for dealing with this issue?
I think you have to take on immigration as a series of building blocks. First, you complete the fence by January 1 of 2014 so that you have control over the border, which does a great deal in terms of stopping drugs, in terms of stopping illegal immigration, in terms of national security. Second, you make English the official language of government so that there's one common language across all the different diversities. Remember, it's not just one or two languages. I think there are something like 84 languages spoken in the Miami-Dade College, for example. Three, you make it easier to get a legal visa to come here as a tourist, for business, as a student, to see family. Four, you make it easier to expel people. If somebody belongs to MS-13, which is a very violent gang, we should be able to get rid of them overnight. There's no reason it should drag out for 2 or 3 years. Then I think you have to create a legal guest worker program so people who do have a job can get a legal permit, come here temporarily. Their employer has legal proof that they're legal. And it ought to be run by American Express, Visa, or MasterCard, because they actually know how to run a program like this without fraud, where the federal government, frankly, can't.
Let's turn our attention now to foreign policy. Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta says Iran is perhaps a year away from obtaining a nuclear bomb. How serious of a threat do you think that is, and what would President Gingrich do to address that particular issue?
I think the danger of an Iranian nuclear weapon is very real because of the downside effect. It's a little bit like, you know, people take buckling a seatbelt in a car different from buckling a seatbelt in an airplane, because an airplane crash tends to be so much more catastrophic than a car crash. If the Iranians get a nuclear weapon, our world will be permanently changed. This is a religiously defined dictatorship. Its particular version of Islam includes a belief in a apocalyptic, bloody, violent end. And you could imagine circumstances where they would go out of their way to use nuclear weapons. So I think it's very important for the world to understand that we cannot allow the Iranians to have a nuclear weapon. I think the only long-term answer is regime change. Callista and I have done 2 movies, one on Ronald Reagan and one on Pope John Paul II. The 2 of them, along with Margaret Thatcher, developed a strategy to replace the Soviet Union. And it's an amazing, one of the great historic campaigns of all time. 99% peaceful. No general war in Europe, no general war in the Pacific, skirmishes in Afghanistan and Nicaragua and El Salvador. The reason I cite that is we need a non-military strategy to replace the Iranian dictatorship. And we need to make quite clear that we are not going to tolerate an Iranian nuclear weapon because it would be so dangerous to the United States.
Well, you've vowed not to run a negative campaign, but supporters of Mitt Romney and Ron Paul are spending millions of dollars attacking you. Do you believe this reflects Romney and Paul's strategy?
It's been pretty intense. I mean, people are seeing 6 or 7 or 8 negative ads in an hour's time. And they're getting negative mail and they're getting negative phone calls. It's pretty remarkable. The long-term effect, I think, will not be very serious. First of all, the ads tend to be lies. And second, the sheer volume of them gets people mad. And so I just came back from a swing, 3-day swing through Iowa. We were doing 6 or 7 cities a day. Everywhere I went, we had huge crowds. And people were saying, please be positive. Talk about how you'll create jobs. Talk about how you'll balance the budget. Tell us what you'll do to rebuild American exceptionalism. And so I've really tried to call on Romney and Paul and Perry, but particularly Romney, who's going to spend the most, to go positive. And my point's been, I mean, Romney has $1,400,000 in negative ads in 1 week in Iowa, which is not a very expensive state to buy ads in. And it just strikes me that it's terrible government. The only person who's helped by these negative ads is Barack Obama. And I don't think Republicans ought to be in the business of helping re-elect Barack Obama.
Well, speaking of which, let's take a minute now and watch an ad that's been put out by a pro-Romney group called Restore Our Future.
Gingrich not only teamed up with Nancy Pelosi on global warming, but together they co-sponsored a bill that gave $60 million a year to a UN program supporting China's brutal one-child policy. As Speaker, Gingrich even supported taxpayer funding of some abortions.
Even the Washington Post has said that this ad is factually wrong. Can you respond, especially to the claim that you support taxpayer-funded abortion?
You know, this is an example of why I sometimes find it a little difficult to be as charitable to Governor Romney as I'd like to be. First of all, the Washington Post fact checker gave this particular ad 4 Pinocchios. Now, that you only get a Pinocchio for something which is factually false. So in a 30-second ad, to get 4 Pinocchios is like, working pretty darn hard. But let's take the one example. Gingrich and Pelosi co-sponsor a bill to pay the Chinese communists for abortions, okay? First of all, the bill was introduced by a Republican, Claudine Schneider of Rhode Island. Second, at the time the bill was introduced, Ronald Reagan's Mexico City policy was in effect. And we paid 0 money anywhere in the world for abortions. So I knew that none of the money could go to pay for abortions because of Reagan's policies. Third, while taking and exaggerating a bill that did not pay for abortion, and my record, by the way, is 98.6% over 20 years with right to life. I twice helped pass the end of partial birth abortion as Speaker, and they were vetoed by Bill Clinton. I think I helped pass the Right to Life Amendment in the Platform Committee in 1984 at the Republican National Convention. I mean, to come at me on an area where my record is extraordinarily solid by a guy who signed a bill which has the state of Massachusetts paying for abortions, and somebody who was pro-abortion before he was anti-abortion, and who actually has been pro-Planned Parenthood. There's some outrageous imbalance of honesty here. And so we're going to actually put together a YouTube video that people will be able to go to newt.org and see. And we're just going to methodically take every ad and every brochure and every phone call and show you what's false and what's accurate so people can render their own judgment.
Another topic that gets a lot of people excited is your consulting work for Fannie and Freddie. I want to give you the chance now to specifically talk about what your role was working with those companies and explain it for us once and for all.
Yeah, I think the important thing to recognize, again, this is one of those cases of gross exaggeration and to some extent close to falsehood. The company that I helped found, which had offices in 3 cities, was paid by Fannie and Freddie. I got a very small part of that.
So when we hear people mention that number, $1.6 million.
The $1.6 million over 6 years went to a company. I mean, the amount that came to me was something like $35,000 a year, because all the rest paid for overhead and staff and the work that was being done, something which a businessman like Mitt Romney would thoroughly understand. There's a big difference between gross revenue and net. Second, we offered strategic planning. We did strategic planning for lots of companies. We were working at different points with Walmart, with IBM, with Siemens, with Microsoft. I mean, just a whole range of really interesting companies that we would work with. The 2 written documents that exist are a memo that they published of mine, which said, by the way, you're going to need more regulations, and a New York Times story which points out that the one time this came up at a House Republican conference, I told them to vote no on helping Fannie and Freddie. So I said, don't bail them out. Don't give them the money. Finally, both Congressman J.C. Watts, who for 7 years had the Freddie Mac Oversight Watch Committee, and Rick Lazio, who was the chairman of the Housing Subcommittee while I was Speaker, both have said publicly, I never once defended Fannie or Freddie. I never once asked them to do anything, and that it is totally false to suggest that in any way I was using my influence on behalf of them. I did strategic planning. I had a big barrier between lobbying, which I have never done, and offering advice, which I'm pretty cheerful about doing.
Well, let's talk about the real differences between Mitt Romney and Newt Gingrich. Explain for us.
Oh, I don't think it's, look, I think this is very simple despite the best efforts of Governor Romney, who let me say up front, is very smart and a very good manager did a very good job with the Winter Olympics, and is somebody who I respect as a person. He is a Massachusetts moderate. I mean, he doesn't like that term. It'll make him irritated, but it's a fact. He ran to the left of Teddy Kennedy in 1994. I mean, he ran to the left of Teddy Kennedy. He said that he was not for Bush and Reagan. He was an independent at a time when I'd spent my entire career working with Reagan. He said that he would not sign the contract with America, which people now believe was the most successful conservative governing document since Reagan. And at that time, he was, pro everything that the left is for. I have been, for my entire career, I'm an Army brat. I came out of a very pro-military background. My dad spent 27 years in the military, in the infantry. I have been consistently pro-defense, consistently for tax cuts, consistently for smaller government, consistently for a balanced budget, consistently for strong values. So take a look at the difference in our record. He passes Romneycare. I chaired the Medicare Reform Task Force of 1996. He works with a Democratic legislature, and they override his veto, I think, 250 times in 1 year. I work with a liberal Democrat in the White House, and I get him to sign welfare reform. I get him to sign the first tax cut in 16 years. I get him to sign 4 consecutive balanced budgets. I mean, pretty big, the gap is pretty big between where the two of us are. And I would say that the one other example that just vividly lights this up. I believe the number one job of the next president is to dramatically create jobs. I helped do it with Reagan. I helped do it as Speaker.
Well, we've talked about Mitt Romney. Let's talk about Ron Paul for a second. He seems to be gaining a little bit of momentum, especially with young people. What are your concerns if Ron Paul becomes the GOP's nominee?
No, he won't. It won't happen. You have somebody who's for the legalization of drugs. You have somebody who blames America for 9/11. You have somebody who doesn't think it matters if Iran gets nuclear weapons and who seems totally unwilling to defend Israel. You have somebody who came out for basically the abolition of Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. And you have somebody who can't defend and won't take responsibility for his own newsletters, even when they had very negative, very destructive things in them. Now, I think Ron Paul is terrific as a protest candidate. And I mean, you have to admire him. He's worked hard. I think he sincerely believes what he's saying. And I think a lot of people are initially attracted to him because it sounds pure and it sounds clear. But those folks haven't looked at what he actually stands for. We're not going to nominate somebody who thinks it's okay for Iran to have nuclear weapons. I think we're not going to nominate somebody who doesn't care if Israel's wiped out.
Well, the Reverend Donald Wildman, the founder of the American Family Association, and one of the foremost and respected evangelicals in this country, he recently endorsed you. Talk about what that endorsement means to you personally.
Well, Reverend Wildman has probably the strongest pro-family group in the United States and believes deeply in a Bible-based understanding of marriage and deeply in an America that is culturally conservative. And he understands fully, for example, that my effort to deal with the judiciary goes at the very heart of the secular elitist effort to change America permanently. And I think to have somebody of his experience and his range of knowledge, and what he really said was I was the one person who could win the nomination for conservatism. And that if people wanted a conservative to be the nominee, I was the one person they could support, that they should support.
He also, in fact, said you are the only GOP candidate who would defend the nation's religious heritage. How specifically would you do that?
Well, I think, first of all, by advocating that the Declaration of Independence be taught in schools on a regular basis. It says we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. Now, that's a very profound statement that needs to be taught, I think, at every level, and needs to be explored and needs to be understood. Second, it's why we posted at newt.org a 54-page paper on judicial reform, because I want to send a signal to the judges that I, for one, am totally fed up. When the Ninth Circuit Court says one nation under God in the Pledge of Allegiance is unconstitutional, that says to me that the Ninth Circuit is unconstitutional because they don't understand America, they don't understand American history, and they're trying to change us into a secular country.
Well, there have been some Christian groups that have expressed concerns about your past and your prior marriages. Can you talk about your faith today and how that will impact your role as the president?
Sure, and let me just start and say it's perfectly reasonable for people to look at the entire life of somebody who's running for president. And I've tried to be very candid and very honest about the fact that I have made mistakes in my life and that I have had to go to God and I have had to apologize to God and I have had to seek reconciliation. It's also true that in becoming a Catholic, and I'm a convert, my wife sings at the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, which is the largest Catholic church in America. And she's been there since 1996. Gradually, I found myself enormously comforted and a feeling that taking the Eucharist, the communion, is such a renewing and revitalizing thing. And that I've always prayed before virtually every speech, and I've always tried to understand what God would do and what God would have me say or have me do. But I think that I'm now 68. I'm very, very close to Callista, my wife. I'm very close to my two daughters, Kathy and Jackie. And I'm very, very close to my two grandchildren, Maggie and Robert, who are 12 and 10. And they're my senior debate coaches. And I think if people look at that, if I'm not asking you to vote for things I've done in the past. I'm asking you to consider whether or not today, as a grandfather, I'm the kind of stable person that you think could actually help save this country at a time when we are truly in a very difficult environment and where we all have to come together. No one person will save the country, but we all have to come together to find a way to get America back on the right track.
Well, let's fast forward now. Let's say you do become the nominee and it's you and Barack Obama on the stage and you have one last chance to make your case to the American people on why you should be president. What is your pitch to the American people?
My core pitch is simple. I believe that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that you, the citizen, are sovereign. You've been given power by God, and that the government is subordinate to you. My opponent, the president, is a Saul Alinsky radical who believes that the government is the center of power and that you're merely a subject, that politicians should decide how much you can earn, and that politicians should control your life. That's a fundamental difference about the future of America. He's the most effective food stamp president in American history. I would like to be the most effective paycheck president in American history. So if you want a future of food stamps, government domination, and politicians defining things, Barack Obama's terrific. If you want a future of paychecks, freedom, and you having to work and define your own life, then Newt Gingrich is your candidate. That's the heart of the choice in 2012.
Well, Speaker, it's been a pleasure and an honor to talk with you here today.
Thank you. It's been great to talk to you. Have a chance to do like this to really talk out the issues.
And thank you, Speaker Gingrich. You have just watched the Newsmax 2012 special election program. You can watch the full program by going to Newsmax.com. And with the election in your state happening soon, we'd like to know who you believe should be the Republican Party's nominee for president. So go to Newsmax.com and simply click on our poll banner and vote. Please encourage your friends and family to do so as well. Remember, your vote counts. Thank you. And may God bless the United States of America. I'm Michael Reagan for Newsmax.com.